So you might ask, what's going on specifically regarding humans that's causing this potential sixth mass extinction, that's causing this increased background rate of extinction? And a lot of it seems to come down to this idea that we are causing rapid environmental change faster than usual, and so it's very difficult for organisms to cope with this rapid change. So what are some of the ways that we're causing this? Well, the first one is the easiest, overexploitation. This is where we just go when we overuse various types of organisms. This could be killing the whales for whale oil. This could be us going through and because we didn't like the Native Americans, wiping out tremendous amounts of buffalo. You can see these are just a giant stack of buffalo skulls. You can see a guy standing on top of it holding a skull and a guy below, so you get a sense of the enormity of how many of these organisms that we just killed. This could be harvesting trees for lumber. It could be harvesting mink for the fur. There's all kinds of stuff that we do that directly results in us killing organisms, and then that would be overexploitation, where we're killing them faster than they can replenish themselves. This is how we lost the passenger pigeon. This is how we lost the Carolina parakeet. There's been lots of organisms that we killed either for fun, for sport, for food, for resources, whether it's fur or oil. We've done this quite a bit. If it's done directly, though, that's typically overexploitation. Now, we can also just damage the habitat. Now, in some cases, this is taking a bulldozer and just turning a forest into farmland. That's pretty much abject destruction. But it can also be more subtle, where you can go through and just disrupt it by perhaps going through and just harvesting all of a certain type of tree, or most of a certain type of tree or plant or animal that we want. We can leave the rest of it there, so the habitat still looks pretty much the same. But because we've taken out one or two pieces of that food web, one or two pieces of that intricate ecosystem, there can be all this collateral damage because now that this particular food source is gone, or this particular predator is gone, now that means everybody else that interacted with that organism suffers. And so you can see some things might grow out of control, and then they might overeat other stuff, and some other guys might ultimately not have a food source, so they might go away. Kind of like if we destroy the eucalyptus, we lose the koalas. And so you don't have to completely annihilate the habitat to really drastically affect it. You just have to go through and mess with some of these chains that are part of the food chain, the food web, and you can cause pretty fair amounts of damage pretty easily. And then habitat fragmentation is one that's kind of tied into this idea of damaging habitats. But what this is we leave a lot of the habitat intact. So if I look at this picture here, I see this is rainforest, this green stuff, this is the trees, this is the untouched stuff. But as they go through building roads, you can see where the roads are, and they start harvesting trees, it's not that suddenly all the rainforest is gone. But what this is a good example of is we start to get these little islands, if you will. So we have an area that you can live that's here in the upper left-hand corner. You've got an area that's kind of in the upper right-hand corner. There's some of these small little areas along the middle. And so the organisms that need to live in this tropical rainforest, what's happening to them is their habitat's getting fragmented, broken into pieces. Now, if you're a big organism, this can be very bad because if we have fences and roads and things that are dangerous or impossible for you to cross, if we start to break up your big habitat into smaller ones, you eventually won't have a big enough habitat to live. So for large organisms, this can drive them to extinction because they just don't have enough space to survive. Now, if you're a small organism, this is still bad, because what ends up happening is you get broken up into these smaller populations, and smaller populations have less genetic diversity, so it makes it harder for you to adapt. And so there's still a punishment, if you will, even if you can survive by being in a smaller group. You also have where there's a bigger edge effect because more organisms now are along the edges of the forest, along the edges of the habitat, and the edge part is less hospitable. You're going to interact with more of a climate because you're not as protected by the trees, so there can be more climate change that you're exposed to, whether it's just rainfall, temperature changes. You can be exposed to other organisms that you normally wouldn't find in the heart of a forest, for instance, but you might find along the edges, so you might be accessible to hawks or owls that are preying on the prairie, but they would not be preying in the forest. So for organisms, it's best to be able to be kind of in the heart of their particular ecosystem. You don't want to be in the edge. It makes you much more likely not to survive. So habitat fragmentation is a major issue, although one that can be solved. You can always go through and try to, fix this by leaving some of these corridors, as they call them, to allow things to access the different fragments. But if you completely separate stuff with roads and fences and parking lots and all these things that are dangerous, you've got to expect it's going to have a major impact on the animals that live there. Pollution, yeah, we pollute quite a bit. You know, that's just one of our downfalls. We want to drive our cars, so there's going to be pollution. We want to have, nice building materials. We want to paint our stuff. We want to go through and get things in nice plastic packaging and then be rid of it and just throw it away. So there's a lot of pollution that we are responsible for. Now, this in itself is not great because a lot of animals can die directly from pollution. But the other problem we have is something called biological magnification, and this is a problem for us too. This one comes back on us, where we go through and pollute stuff like the water supply, and then the small organisms get just a little bit of it, so they're doing okay. And then the organisms that eat them, because they have to eat a lot of small organisms, remember that idea of energy where you have to eat a lot of something because you lose most of its energy, that 90-10 rule, you only keep 10%. So if you're a little fish here, you've got to eat a lot of krill, little crustaceans. You have to eat a lot of them to stay alive. So you eat a lot of little amounts of pollution, which starts to build up in you. So now the smaller fish start to have a higher amount of pollution, which might still be safe for us to ingest as you see here, but it still gets to be significant because then the bigger guys that eat them, they ultimately start to get more bigger pieces of pollution, and that builds up in their body, so now they get to have quite a bit of pollution in them. That's the idea of magnification. It keeps getting bigger. And then eventually you get to even bigger guys like sharks that eat the bigger fish, and now they get a whole bunch of these bigger pieces of pollution, so now they are quite toxic in some cases in terms of their pollution levels. And so that's why if you eat fish, for instance, you have to be very careful if you're pregnant or may become pregnant of certain types of fish, especially large fish, because they can have large amounts of various toxins or pollutants such as mercury, which is the one we're looking at here. So that's why the label will say if you're pregnant or may become pregnant, please do not eat this more than once a week, or do not eat it at all. That's what this comes down to. And so because we are eating a bunch of fish or a bunch of meat or a bunch of plants, if we let those things get polluted as we eat them, we are essentially, above this level of the shark. So we're essentially here. And that means we're going to have even higher levels of pollutants in our own bodies, which we don't want. So this is something to be very careful of if you're a human, if you want to have a long, healthy life. Now, I love acid precipitation talking about it because so many people initially think acid precipitation is where like acid's pouring down the rain and your face is like melting because you're out there. This is like some scene from Batman and how you got the Joker or Two-Face or something. No. Acid precipitation has a pH that's normally around 5, which means it is acidic. But if you look at most pops, their pH is around 3.5 or 4, which is much worse. So if you can drink a pop, you could drink acid precipitation, and it wouldn't do a thing to you. But the problem is, for plants and for fish, they kind of have this moisture that's always around them, and it affects them. So if you're a plant, having all of this acid basically in the soil makes it harder for you to get nutrients from the soil. So it makes it harder for them to get the things that they need to grow and live properly. Now, if you're a fish, you are kind of always bathed in this water, and the water has a certain pH. And you can think of pH to a fish being something kind of like temperature, where if the pH gets too high, which would be basic, or too low, which is acidic, they start to fall apart. They start to struggle to live because they can't properly carry out the chemical reactions needed for them to survive. So just like you can get a fever and die, or you can get hypothermia and die, they can have where the pH gets too high and it kills them, or too low and it kills them. So even small changes that make the pH drop can kill fish, can kill crustaceans, can kill anything that's living in the water especially. This is why it can be so dangerous when you look at this and it falls into the environment, because it gets in the rivers, it gets in the lakes, and it ultimately can kill things. Even though it wouldn't harm you, it can still kill things that live there. Now this is a fairly long section because we're doing a lot of stuff that's kind of not good. So with this one, here's a few more things that we're doing that are kind of messing things up just to wrap things up. So eutrophication we've discussed before. This is when you get too many nutrients. So you get like nitrogens, you get phosphates, you get these nutrients that seem like they're good. They're in fertilizers, seem helpful. But when a bunch of them get into a lake, for instance, or a pond, they cause the algae to grow like crazy. As the algae die and decompose, it uses up the oxygen. And so you get a pond like this that's like crazy green, and you might even see like a bunch of dead little fish sitting around the side because they lacked oxygen. It's not a good thing. This, while it might look kind of pretty, this is not a place you want to go swimming. because A, low oxygen is not good if you were like a fish that's swimming there, but even as a person, some of these algae will produce those chemicals we talked about that can be aggravating and cause issues. So this is not something we want to aim for, but it is something that we're causing as we keep fertilizing stuff. Some of the fertilizer runs off. A lot of the wastewater that we have, like detergents that we use to clean clothes, used to have a lot of phosphorus in them or phosphates. And so as that got dumped into local lakes, rivers, streams as wastewater, it caused these algal blooms. So we're getting a bit better in some cases as we start to like really focus on this more, but this is still a major problem that we've caused that kills a lot of aquatic organisms, especially animals, in ponds and lakes. Now the last one, probably the saddest one, is introduced species. Now this is when we bring non-native species with us and dump them off somewhere else, either accidentally, like rats on a ship, or intentionally, like me dropping off rabbits in Australia as a British guy in, I believe, the 1860s, might be wrong on that, but the 1800s, because he wanted to hunt rabbits. And then now we've got a crazy rabbit problem where they take over. They don't have natural predators that do a good job culling them. They do a very good job of eating the food and out-competing native species, so they can cause native species to go extinct. This happens a lot, especially on islands. They will go in there and you'll get rats. The birds oftentimes are not adapted to having things that prey upon their eggs and chicks. And so they're laying eggs and putting their chicks in harm's way because they have not adapted to, go higher in the trees, or they have not adapted to somehow protect them. And so now these new organisms can just go decimate and make whole species go extinct in no time. Some examples, we've got Australia with the cane toad. They introduced that to try to take care of, I believe it was the cane grub, which they don't really eat. And so instead, the cane toads, which are toxic, so most predators can't eat them, basically just went crazy. And so there's a ton of them. If you look aquatically, we have the Great Lakes, which we're near the Great Lakes here. So Lake Erie, Lake Michigan, they have zebra mussels, which were brought in on ships. And then these zebra mussels grow like crazy. They clog things that like pipes and such because they grow so densely. They can be fairly sharp. So if you're trying to walk along in the water, they can cut your feet. So they have done some good things because they filtered the water, so they have probably helped clean up Lake Erie a little bit, but they also have made certain species of fish have difficulty living there because when they clean up the water, some species of fish want it to be cloudy water, like they're used to that. That's their particular environment. So if we make the water too clear, you can also cause a shift as far as what species of fish can live there, and that can lead to extinctions or movements of things in that area. And then a plant, kudzu. This is a vine that's just very, very aggressive, that's Asian, that was brought over. They used it initially to go through and like grow in embankments to keep erosion, to keep the soil from kind of washing away. But this stuff does a really good job of growing fast, and it'll grow over just about anything. So you can see here, this is all kudzu that's just growing up and over the trees, and so it can kill just about anything in its way because it just throws its own leaves over the top of everything else, and then it lives, but everything else then can't get light, so they'll die. So they can kill forests and just take over. So right now there's lots of stuff trying to figure out ways to control kudzu to keep it in the US from continuing to spread. Right now it's primarily in the southeastern portion, like around Georgia and Florida, the Carolinas, but we're trying to prevent it from going too much further and continuing to cause ecological damage.